Can you hear me now? Our guest presenter showed up out of nowhere. He contacted me in search of photos of Arnold Printworks, one of many requests I usually get. And Arnold Printworks, as you know, was one of the largest employers of Adams for the 50s and 60s and 70s. And which burnt in the largest fire in Adams history 40 years ago this November. It was November 28th, 1954. Mr. Trudell has researched and published this great book about this amazing man, his grandfather, Samuel M. Jones, who bought the Rental Manufacturing Company when it went bankrupt in 1927, and he turned it into the Arnold Printworks, into a printing company. Well, welcome, Mr. Samuel M. named after his grandfather, to the
I'm really happy to be here. Very honored to be in this building with you guys. As you probably have noticed, there's a technical glitch. I put together a spectacular presentation for you that is very likely not going to be shown today, which is really a little bit sad. But my daughter and her partner are back there working on it, and miraculously they may pull the rabbit out of the hat and get the computer connected so that we can actually use that. If we don't, what I'm going to do is I will, for those of you who are really interested, and it's a really interesting presentation, I will send it to Eugene, and he may be able to share it with all of you at a future time, and you can view it at your leisure. But I'm going to get started anyway. I'm not going to hold my breath that presentation is done. So, who am I? Again, my name is Sam Trudell. I live in Vermont, in Middlebury, Vermont. I was born in North Adams. I like to say that I was very likely one of the last children born in the old North Adams Hospital, which was demolished in 1955 to be replaced by the now not fully functioning North Adams Hospital. You guys know this story probably much better than I do. But I was born in that hospital. As a boy, I lived in Williamstown, and as Eugene said, I am named after my grandfather, Samuel Mansfield Jones, and the name Jones means something to you all in this room because Samuel Mansfield Jones bought the Arnold Printworks when he was 39 years old, and within 2 years of buying the Arnold Printworks in North Adams, the Renfrew Manufacturing Company went out of business. And the plant here in Adams was put up for auction. Now, I'm going to probably say many things to you today that this is a room of historians. You may know this information better than I do even, but I'm going to just tell you my understanding of the story, and if anybody wants to throw out any additional information, feel free. So here's the book, and this may be the one picture of Samuel Jones that you get to see today. I'm going to just take a few minutes and tell you about this man, my mother's father. Samuel Jones was also born in North Adams. He lived on River Street, which is right across the street from the Arnold Printworks. His mother and her 4 children came together with their parents and emigrated from Ireland right after the U.S. Civil War. So if you can imagine a young 1860s with 5 young children and get on a boat, which of course at that time was a 3-masted sailboat, huge sail, get on a boat and sail for the United States. Left everything behind and started a new life here in this country. This is, in many ways, the quintessential American story, because we know that very likely everyone in this room has an ancestor who came from somewhere else. So, Sam Jones's mother and her family eventually moved to North Adams. They're first listed in 1870 in the U.S. Census. Now, again, this is a great pleasure for me to talk to a room of people who are interested in history, because I have been spending the better part of the last 5 years deeply researching this project, and I'm going to quickly throw in a little tidbit here, which is the Sam Jones book, which I will have, you guys can look at it briefly. I donated one to the Adams Historical Society, so you're able to check this book out and look at it on your own. Is the second book of a 2-book companion series. The first book happens to be about William Arthur Gallup. This man was a long-time treasurer of Arnold Printworks. He started with Arnold Printworks in the around 1870 and had a 50-year career with Arnold Printworks. He was partners with A.C. Houghton. That's a name that hopefully some of you know. A.C. Houghton, one of the fathers of this North Adams, and in fact the first mayor of North Adams. And that looks promising. A.C. Houghton was the first mayor of North Adams, and he basically bought the Arnold Printworks in its early days and was responsible for building Arnold Printworks up to what eventually became a very, very large international textile printing company. Now, I'm not going to look back there because it makes me too nervous. But Arthur Gallup was my great-grandfather. And so both of these books are a bit of a passion project for me, because they are my great-grandfather and my grandfather. And interestingly enough, they both owned Arnold Printworks. Now, why did that happen that way? It's an interesting story. If you want a lot of details of it, it's in the book, but I'm going to tell you quickly what the story is. Sam Jones, his mom, married in North Adams, and her husband died fairly young. So she was a single mother when Sam Jones was just 5 years old. They were not wealthy. They were an immigrant family. Many of you probably know that North Adams and the industry in North Adams, the textile industry in North Adams, at the turn of the last century, around 1905, which is generally regarded as the peak of the production of Arnold Printworks, fully one-third of all of the residents in Adams, in North Adams, were immigrants. And so my grandfather just happened to go to the same church as Arthur Gallup's daughter. And they fell in love. In high school, at Drury High School in North Adams. Now, that one event changed a lot of history because Samuel Jones married Arthur Gallup's daughter. He eventually owned the Arnold Print Works. So that's the connection that Sam Jones had to the Arnold Print Works. His young wife's father owned the company. Now, as I'm sure we can all very easily assess, that's a pretty big leg up. But that in and of itself isn't going to do very much. Sam Jones, right after high school, after he married Arnold Print Works owner, his daughter, he embarked with his young wife on a 9-year education plan that took him from North Adams first to Philadelphia, where he studied for 2 years in a textile school. Then they decided that he needed to get more education in chemistry. In 1910, this young couple, they were just 19 and 18 years old, they got on a great steamer across the Atlantic Ocean and they moved to Germany. Sam studied German, the German language, in order to attend what was at the time the world's leading school of theoretical chemistry. And he attended that school and studied chemistry in the German language, which he had just learned. So that in and of itself is pretty remarkable. He was a very smart guy, he was very ambitious, and he had a very clear plan to continue his education and eventually return to the United States and work for his father-in-law, work for the Arnold Print Works. It's a very, very interesting story what happened in Europe. They were there for 9 years, and after he finished his education in Germany, he got a job offer in Moscow. So here's this young couple, again, from just a mile and a half down the road. In 1912, they moved to Moscow, Russia. And they lived in Russia for 5 years. Sam, by the way, learns to speak Russian. He was hired by a textile printing company in Moscow because he had just had this fantastic education in Germany. So he moves his wife, he now has 2 children, to Moscow. They lived there for 5 years, and he works in a textile manufacturing company in Moscow. Now, if you can imagine, and I imagine when I worked on this project, what it must have been like for a young couple from North Adams to be living in Moscow, Russia, between 1910 and 1915. What do we know is going on in Russia at that time? These are the last days of the Tsars. The very last days of the Tsars. My grandfather, and I have the greatest gift of many, many letters that my grandfather wrote home from Moscow. He described what it was like living in Moscow, and I transcribed a lot of these letters, most of these letters, many of which are in this book. He writes that there are so few people who speak English in Moscow, he knows every single one of them. He knows everybody who speaks English in Moscow. Pretty cool. World War I breaks out in 1914. He's living in Moscow. And he realizes that he had better get home because Russia and Germany are at war. He leaves Moscow and he comes back to North Adams with his young family, and he immediately starts working for the Arnold Printworks in North Adams. Now, I'm going to assume in this room that most people know at least something about the Arnold Printworks in North Adams. The most obvious thing for people today is that it is the complex of buildings that is now Masmoka. All of those buildings were built by my great-grandfather, Arthur Gallup, who was the treasurer of that company, and he returns and gets a job as a chemist at Arnold Printworks. He immediately, within the next 2 years, he earns a number of U.S. patents for inventions that he makes for different kinds of chemical treatments of fabric, because that is the business that they're in. They're in the business of printing on fabric. Now, very quickly, and I'm going to get to Renfrew in the part that's Adams, but very quickly, as you all may know, and you guys have these wonderful displays, by the way, I personally have never seen these fabrics before. Very exciting for me, really exciting. And I have some to show and share with you guys too that you have never seen. These are drapery fabrics that were printed at the Jones Division in Adams. But, so Sam Jones eventually, when Arthur Gallup retires, the owner of the company retires, this is his son-in-law. His son-in-law, at 39 years old, puts together a financial package and buys Arnold Printworks. There was a lot of competition. There were a number of people in the country that were wanting to buy Arnold Printworks because in 1926, when this happened, Arnold Printworks was an internationally famous company. They printed miles and miles of fabric every single week. Huge. At their peak in the turn of the last century, they employed over 2,000 employees. There were also, as most of you know, a number of cotton mills in this region that produced the fabric that was printed at the Arnold Printworks. Many of these mills early on in the company's history were owned by the Arnold Printworks. Several of them were in North Adams. The Eclipse Mill, if you know nothing about the Eclipse Mill other than now it's a very lovely apartment complex in North Adams. The Eclipse Mill was a very, very productive mill that wove cotton fabric. And that cotton fabric was used to print any number of products from the Arnold Printworks. So, in Adams, as you also well know, Adams was a major center of mill activity that produced beautiful cotton fabrics. One, the Berkshire Cotton Manufacturing Company, one of the largest employers in Adams for many years, and Eugene could probably tell you more details about that than I can, but Berkshire Cotton Manufacturing Company, a huge cotton company here in Adams, and the Renfrew Manufacturing Company. At the time when Sam Jones bought the then closed Renfrew Mill, 1927, Renfrew had been around for 50 plus years. One of the country's top producers of different types of fabrics, maybe best known for gingham fabric, but they had gone out of business. What Sam Jones did was quite revolutionary at the time, is he took the Renfrew mills, which were right down the street here, and he gutted them entirely and changed the Renfrew Manufacturing Company from a company that produced cotton textile to a company that printed cotton textiles. Changed it from a mill to a printing company. He he had all the expertise in the world because he had worked at Arnold Printworks at that point for 10 years. His father-in-law ran the company for 50 years. It was a very successful company, and they had a lot of good ideas of how to create a very, very good and efficient, the terminology that was used at the time, they referred to it as a printworks. So they took a mill, they took everything out of the mill completely, started from scratch, designed some equipment, moved 14 huge multicolor printing presses into this new building, which my grandfather, Dr. Samuel Mansfield Jones, called the Jones Division. It was the Jones Division of the Arnold Printworks. So that's the beginning of the story of how the Jones Division came about. If the mill was up for auction, and another thing that we all probably know pretty well about the textile industry in America is that over the decades of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, a once thriving industry in New England, particularly in this region of printing textiles, little by little, that industry migrated to the south, where labor was less expensive. It's where the cotton was grown. So it was a very, very difficult transition time for textile industries in New England because there was a lot of competition from the south. And many textile companies that thrived for many years in New England went out of business, particularly during the Great Depression. But because Dr. Jones started this mill from scratch, literally from scratch in 1927, he created what was generally described in local media as an incredibly innovative company that was the best textile printing company of its type in the country. Now the Jones Division happened, so here we are in 1927, 1928, 29, the company is incredibly successful. The Arnold Printworks under Dr. Jones's leadership doubles its profits. It's a big company now. There's a big division in Adams, and of course they have the Arnold Printworks in North Adams. Both companies very, very big. Together over 3,000 employees. There are not a lot of employers in this region right now that employ 3,000 employees. But at that time, there were a number of large companies. So Arnold Printworks was one of them. And then comes along 1929, and what happens in 1929? The Great Depression. The Great Depression hits, and all of a sudden, a thriving company with thousands of employees, an incredibly profitable company, is thrown into turmoil with the financial difficulties of the Great Depression. Now, one of the things that I'm most proud of for my grandfather, and if you remember one thing about Dr. Jones, it's this. During the Great Depression, when 75% of all of the textile mills in the country went out of business, Dr. Jones kept the Jones Division and the Arnold Printworks, both manufacturing companies, kept them running throughout the entire Great Depression. This was an incredible feat, and it was very, very difficult. People definitely had their hours cut back. They did all sorts of things to make ends meet, but the local newspaper, which I strongly suspect most of you in this room know very well, no longer with us, the North Adams Transcript. By the way, I'm an old newspaper guy. About the Life of Arnold Printworks, a lot of my source material came from the North Adams transcript. Now, when I was young, and I'm just about to turn 70, when I was young, if you wanted to do research about local history, you would go down to the library and get out the card catalog and cross your fingers and hope that you'll find something that's relevant to what you're doing. Does that sound familiar to anybody in this room? Yes, of course it does. Today, with computer technology, you can search, and I read over 400 articles in the North Adams transcript about the Jones Division and the Arnold Printworks, because they were a large employer, and the newspaper covered them. In fact, covered every detail of this business. The struggle that the company went through during the Great Depression was very closely monitored in Adams and North Adams, because so many people depended on this as their income and employment. And when many people around the country were struggling, as we know they did in the Great Depression, one of the great gifts for this community was that Adams and North Adams weathered the Great Depression in much better shape than most any other place in the country. And one of the reasons for that was the good management of Dr. Samuel Jones. The North Adams transcript has a wonderful article about this exact thing. And gosh, I'm so sorry I don't have this presentation for you, because I have these quotes from the newspaper that talk about this, about what an extraordinary achievement it was to save this great industry from failure during the Great Depression. So 1937, the Arnold Printworks goes into bankruptcy. Just like many of the industries in this region. But Sam Jones figures out a way within a year and a half to save the company. He comes out of bankruptcy without even taking a loan, by restructuring the company and refinancing, and the company reemerges in 1939 and is profitable again. 1939. The Jones Division has a reputation as one of the finest manufacturers of drapery fabrics in the nation. And I'm not sure the best way to do this. A couple of years ago, on eBay, actually bought, wherever they are. Oh yeah, right there, thank you. You guys have this great collection of fabrics from Arnold Printworks. It's not easy to come by these. That's a nice collection. What's particularly interesting is you can find lots of records of fabric on the internet that somebody has written maybe came from the Jones Division in Adams. But a couple years ago, I came across 3 sample books of fabric that very specifically are identified as from the Draperies Division in Adams. And I hope you'll take a second, maybe when I'm done, to take a look at these, but I'll give you a quick little sense of it. The Jones Division and the Arnold Printworks was famous for their amazing designs. They were gorgeous fabrics. And this particular style, this book is a salesman sample book. The Arnold Printworks, at that point in 1940, employed 50 full-time salesmen who sold drapery fabrics and other fabrics all over the country. 50. They were out of New York City. It was another innovation of Dr. Jones. He started a sales corporation, the Arnold Sales Corporation, specifically to sell the fabric that they were printing here in Adams, and their offices were in New York City. So the salesmen were given these beautiful custom-made sample books as samples to go around and sell these fabrics. Be very delicate with this because,
Wow.
yeah. These are original drapery fabrics that were printed in Adams. Draperies, it turns out, these beautiful floral draperies were a sensation. It was a fashion trend in the 1930s, and some of you may remember, you might have had a grandmother who had these beautiful draperies in their home. This was the main product of the Jones division in those early years. And because it was such a popular thing to have these beautiful floral draperies, the Jones division was extremely profitable. So he comes out of the Great Depression, returns the company to profitability. 1940, when that piece of fabric was printed, the company is very successful. And everything's back on track. Over 1,000 employees at the Jones division here in Adams. 1,000. And then, you know, as is true in the manufacturing world, in the business world, things happen, things change in history. 1942 comes around, and what happens in this country in 1942? World War II. World War II comes around. If you're seeing those fabrics and you're close to them and you get a chance, actually feel them. They're really beautiful. 1942, World War II breaks out, and all of the cotton that is manufactured in this country is requisitioned for use in the war. All of it. This put the Arnold Print Works in a terrible, terrible position. They literally had nothing to print on. And so the board of directors of Arnold Print Works, wouldn't you love fabrics? Wouldn't you love draperies made out of that fabric right now? I certainly would. They were really famous for the beauty of their designs. So, 1942, they are forced into liquidation. Because the war comes, they have nothing to print on anymore. And when you have a company that has a huge manufacturing plant, gigantic machinery, 1,000 employees, and they don't have anything to do, and those printing machines are not turning, you're going to lose money real fast. And so Dr. Jones and the board of directors was forced into liquidation. The company is closed in 1942 after an 79-year history. Now, a couple other details, and how am I doing on time, Gene? About 10 minutes.
You're fine.
Okay. Two things happen. Remember, there's two different plants that the Arnold Print Works owns. They own the plant in North Adams, and they own the plant in Adams. As you all know, the Jones division continued because right after the Arnold Print Works liquidated and closed down, the Jones division was purchased by Aspinall Corporation, and very quickly, Aspinall Corporation kept that plant going as soon as the war situation changed and they were able to start printing again. So here in Adams, the Jones division continued, which is quite a wonderful success story because the company that Dr. Jones started kept its manufacturing going in Adams for another 40 plus years. It continued to be a major employer in Adams. Ownership of the company changed a little bit over the years, but they continued to print great textiles, as is evidenced by this nice collection here. What happened to the plant in North Adams? The complex on Marshall Street in North Adams? This is a very interesting story, and I could talk about it all day long, but it just so happens that another company happened to be growing just at the same time, and that was Sprague Electric. Interesting little historical tidbit. The original Sprague was a partner with Edison. He was an inventor, a genius. He was very well known for his inventions with the very new technology of electricity. And his son, R.C. Sprague, started a company that manufactured electric components for transistor radios, other things, but what they really did well is 1942, he bought that company in North Adams, and they started immediately making components that were used in the war for various reasons. They made a number of products. So Sprague Electric takes over the company in North Adams. Again, I'm just taking a wild guess that some people, quite a number of the people in this room, will remember Sprague Electric. Sprague Electric thrived in the plant in North Adams all the way through the 80s, a very successful company. So that's what happened in North Adams. In Adams, the Jones division continues printing, and they continue to print all the way right up into the early 80s. Now, a North Adams transcript has a wonderful article describing the difficulties that the Adams plant had. They called it years on a tightrope, because if you remember, as I said earlier, during this time, textile manufacturing mostly migrated to the south. And yet, the Jones division of Arnold Print Works, and eventually the name Arnold Print Works was returned to that company. Most people, I suspect, remember it as the Arnold Print Works here in Adams. They held on, despite this enormous trend of textile manufacturing in New England going out of business. They held on all the way to the early 80s. Not easily, though. They had all sorts of problems. And the company, little by little, got smaller. It was a very big challenge to be profitable, being a textile printer in New England, when most of the other companies had gone out of business. The North Adams transcript in 1980, when they first started really having serious problems financially that threatened the company, they write that they are amazed the company held on so long. It was a great credit to them that they held on so long. So now, here we are, we've made it to the early 1980s. And Sprague Electric is still doing all right in North Adams. Jones division of the Arnold Print Works, actually, excuse me, now just called the Arnold Print Works here in Adams. The textile business takes a nosedive around 1980. They lose 75% of their business in 2 years. That's a problem. The company that owned Arnold Print Works at the time sells it, very much to the credit of the citizens in Adams, a local group, and I know this now starts to become history with some of you, and I know Eugene, remembers this history very well. A local group of people got together to try to save the Arnold Print Works and save the jobs that they had. At that point in 1982, there were still about 600 or 700 employees working at Arnold Print Works. They created a corporation. They get a $3 million loan to try to save this company. They did not succeed. It was too much. The company, by 1983, the writing was on the wall, and 1984 was the fire? So 1984 was the fire, so roughly around that time, in the year before that, the company closes. They have a lot of debt. Interestingly enough, one of their biggest debts is to the town of Adams. They can't pay their water sewage bill. $300,000 in arrears at that time. So they can't pay their bills. They're forced to close. And that becomes literally the end of the Arnold Print Works. And when you think about the Renfrew manufacturing company that started in the 1870s, we know? Renfrew? Somewhere around the 1870s. Over 100 years of textile manufacturing came to an end here in Adams. Over 100 years of textile manufacturing. It's a sad story. Yet, it's not inconsistent with what was going on in the rest of the country. Textile manufacturing was in decline in this country. First, textile manufacturing was moved to the south, and this is the story of manufacturing in this world right now. Eventually, textile manufacturing was sent overseas. And now here we are today, fast forward, just out of curiosity, and I think very sadly this country does not manufacture a lot of things the way that we did 150 years ago, 50 years ago. China produces a great deal of the things that we purchase today. But at the time, the company had survived through thick and thin. 1984, as Gene said, I think November 1984, a good deal of the Arnold Print Works complex here in Adams burns. A huge fire. The newspaper called it the Great Conflagration. It's such a great word, you don't get to use it very often. Conflagration. Huge fire. And most of the manufacturing buildings are burnt down. Except for the main original Renfrew building was saved by the amazing efforts of the Adams Fire Department. So, 1984, the fire burns most of the buildings. The main original Renfrew Company building is still standing, and it stands here in Adams for 10 years. 84 to 94. It's abandoned. A shell of a company here in Adams. I've heard alluded a little bit of the backstory of what happened during that time. I don't have specific details about it. Gene has an interesting story about this particular thing because right around that time in the 80s, while the Arnold Print Works sits abandoned here in Adams, an art professor at Williams College comes up with this great idea that he wants to buy and turn the old, now called Sprague Electric business. They also went out of business in the 80s. The Sprague Electric business is out. He wants to turn the complex of 26 buildings on Marshall Street in North Adams into what? An art museum. Now, I don't know how you feel about this, but it was quite an amazing achievement. They did it. with a lot of funding from a lot of different sources. They did it. And that is now mass mobile. So the original buildings of Arnold Brickworks in North Adams, again, built in large part with the leadership of my great-grandfather, Arthur Gallup. By the way, there are a couple of descendants of our family here in this room, and I have another, my second cousin Cordelia here is also Arthur Gallup's great-grandmother. So that's pretty cool. Thank you for coming, Cordelia. It's your family history. I don't know how many of you have actually researched your own family history. It really becomes quite interesting. Arthur Gallup is very sad. Arthur Gallup, the man that I covered in this first book, our great-grandfather, his first wife died fairly young. He had 2 children. One was my grandmother with his first wife. He then married again, and Cordelia is the great-grandchild of the second wife. So she is my second half cousin. That stuff gets confusing very quickly. But believe me, it's wonderful, wonderful to have her here. And the Gallup family, by the way, still owns Arthur Gallup's childhood home in Clarksburg, which is very cool. So back to, just to wrap up the story of the Arnold Brickworks here in Adams. 1994, try as they may to develop that building and develop that site, they did not succeed. And in 1994, the building was razed, gone. All of the bricks shipped out, recycled somewhere, and that was the end, really the last chapter of the Arnold Brickworks in 1994. A sad story. I think a lot of people in Adams wanted to keep that building and save it. When you think back on it now, probably there were a lot of ideas that people were floating to try to develop that property. It was listed in the 80s on the National Register of Historic Buildings. The Arnold Brickworks, the original ran-through manufacturing company, it was one of the best examples of what is referred to as Italianate mill design in the country. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous brick building with amazing brick detail. And it was really just a gem here in Adams. But unfortunately, 1994 ends that history, and my grandfather, Samuel Mansfield Jones, just to sort of finish his story, 1942, when he sold the company, he's done, he's out of business. I personally found it interesting when I was doing this research. How much money did somebody who owned this large company make? Kind of curious to me. Well, he did very well. And he lived in Williamstown at this beautiful estate. My mother, who grew up in Williamstown, grew up in a wealthy family. She was riding horses in the Great Depression, just as an example of the wealth that Samuel Jones achieved by owning and running these 2 plants for so many years. Very sadly, Sam Jones, he has a stroke in 1943, just a year after he retires. He lives with very significant physical impairment for the next 10 years, and he died in 1954. I was named after him, and just as a nice, sweet way to remember him, because my mother tells this story, holding me as an infant, I was born 3 weeks before he died. My mother named me after him, and my mother says that holding me was the last thing he did. So I'm really, really pleased and proud to come here to Adams to share his story. Please, you guys have a copy of this book. If you are at all interested, and I strongly encourage you you to borrow it from your society, historical society. He was a man who was ambitious. He married into a very, very prominent family, but it was his intelligence, his hard work, and his own industriousness that got him the success that he achieved in his life. And I think, having studied his life very, very closely now for the last 6 or 8 years, that his achievement of creating the Jones division in Adams was his greatest achievement. What he was able to do here, and it kept the textile industry in Adams going long after he sold the business. So the Arnold Print Works was a great legacy for Sam Jones, originally called the Sam Jones division. And here I am, Sam Jones's grandson, telling the story in the Adams Library. It makes me very happy, and thank you very much for coming today. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about the pattern designers.
Yes. Arnold Printworks had an entire office in New York City. The designers were in New York City. I have a photograph of them in the Gallup book. There were 14 designers, and they had the exclusive job of creating mostly these floral fabrics. Although, as you can see, they printed a lot of different types of fabrics over the years. I didn't know this, I love this article here. Grandma Moses designed some art, and it was printed on those fabrics.
My father was a textile printer, he printed that. Grandma Moses came.
Well, hallelujah! Your father or your grandfather? Your father.
Shook her hand.
Okay.
She came right into the plant. And he got his machine. They used to start the machine on job just to let it come through the.
Yeah.
He let it shift it up the first.
Wow.
Machine.
Wow.
Grandma Moses.
Wow.
All we heard about.
This machine right here.
Oh, look at that. This is one of the original company.
That was the machine he worked on.
Oh, how cool is that? Wow. Well, so here, this is the beautiful thing about history. Here we have, his father worked at the Jones division. And he was there when Grandma Moses came and printed her fabric. So, even though it's a long time ago, this is living history right here because the sun is sitting right there.
I was in that plant several times. I go in and visit with him, and I met the foreman and the superintendent.
It was a huge business. Those buildings were gigantic. They just went on, and rows of gigantic machines that were all manufactured locally. Thank you for sharing that story. Very cool. Yes, sir.
What church did your grandfather and...
St. John's. St. John's Church in North Adams. Arthur Gallup particularly was devoted to St. John's Church. And he served in that church in literally every capacity they had. He was a major philanthropist who contributed a lot of money. In St. John's Church, a beautiful round church, was designed and commissioned as a memorial to Arthur Gallup and his wife Harriet. So it is in their memory that the Gallup family purchased that beautiful stained glass window.
I have a small request. I was wondering if you can hold the printed textiles up again?
Yes.
And I'd like to, you probably can
Yeah,
answer this
why-
question.
Because there's 3 different textiles here. One is paisley, one is little florals. They're really, really beautiful.
And the ones that we initially looked at, you can probably answer this yourself, but I wanted to point out that all 4 of those were printed from the same place.
Yes.
And if you look carefully at the designs, you can see that they were zinc plates. And I just wanted people to know that because it's such a fascinating part of that process.
It's a fascinating part. So here, all 4 of these designs are the same design. The artist created the design, but in the print shop, they switched up the colors. And the most obvious thing is the background. You have a beige background, a blue background, a red background, and a green background. The exact same design, but by printing each plate in a different color, it created a variation on the design, because in draperies, as you might imagine, you want to match your room. So the color of the draperies made a big difference. So they gave you options of which one of these beautiful designs would work for draperies in your house.
Thank you, and I live in Eclipse Hill.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for that observation. It's really true, and it's true of all of these different fabric pieces.
So if you take anybody takes a close look, you can see that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I encourage you, we'll leave them open. Come up afterwards and take a look at it. By the way, just want to tell you, this is my partner Liz, and this is my daughter Alyssa. So this is Sam Jones's great-granddaughter. She lives in North Bennington, and she came down to participate and help us out. So thanks for that, Alyssa. Any other questions? Yes.
You know what Chester Gallop? Check out.
Do I know a Chester Gallop? I do not.
I went to school with John.
Well, this Cordelia is very likely to know better than I do. Ask her.
No, the name sounds familiar.
There were a lot of gallops. He's asking the question that somebody he knows that he's just wondering if he can identify where the Gallop family were. Without opening up the whole story again, Cordelia and I were talking about this. It's a very interesting thing. Arthur Gallop had 2 wives. In the times that he lived, this was between the 1870s and 1910-ish, he and his 2 wives together had 8 children. Only 3 lived. So with each wife, the Gallops lost 4 children. And those children lived anywhere from infancy all the way to 12 years old. So we can be very grateful for modern medicine. Arthur Gallop had all the money you could possibly want, but that did not save his family from this great tragedy. And his first wife died as well. So it's a sad part of his life, despite all of his amazing achievements in industry. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our refreshments in there. I had 2 things to say, but now I have 4. Number 1, everything you see here was partly printed by Aspen, if you're not Arnold, Jones edition. Just to clarify that. But also, the second point is that I think souped up that there was in October of 1984, and they said we had permission to go into the basement of their offices and take material out. And most of the stuff here is from that, when we took out truckload of stuff that we had. This was like 1 month before the place had gone. So we preserved all the stuff before it went to the fire. As well as there's some color separations here. There was a demonstration of how many colors were added during the cloth. Number 3 is, he talked about the revival of it. In '67, it was when Aspen Milk and Indian Head was going to go out of business. There was 3 businessmen, Mervyn Weinberg, Edmund Ginsburg, and J. Norman O'Connor, whose son is sitting back there, got together and put together the money and got government grants, and Edward Kennedy actually kicked in money from the government to save that bill. Because they knew they had the technology, they had the smarts. And between 67 until I would easily say 1979, 80, they made a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because in '69, they hooked up with Waverly Schumacher. And Waverly Schumacher moved to Adams, and Arnold was printing for them. And And so that's why Waverly was here as well. And Waverly Schumacher is considered the last textile firm that ever existed in Adams. And there was also, and the fourth one was those refreshments back there. I apologize that we didn't get this to work, because I always love photographs and pictures, and